we're recording now. I am up here at the top of an old skid road in Cottage Grove, Oregon, above the owl moon prints. I still come down here once a month, and it's the beginning of November. And so I came up this way and thought I would drive one of the old skid roads. Just parked the car. The actual owl moon lab area is way off at the end of that road there. I don't know if you can see in that area there. I'll zoom in a bit, but way down there's some mountain ranges. And then the knee impressions are about 45 minutes that way through an old skid road. But oddly enough, I came out here to film for, well, I didn't actually come out here to film. See, strange stuff happens when I come to town, and I pulled over at Target to get an air freshener. And when I hopped on the phone here, I was inside the department store and was texting about the owl moon lab. And as I set my phone down, on the last shirt on the rack was a child-size shirt with an owl and a moon. Don't know what else to say, except it's a pretty curious shirt. Don't think I've ever seen that before laid out. Just an odd coincidence, I would say. Don't you think? So what started off as a maybe of me coming out here because I had business out here, now I find myself maybe taking the bait and coming out here. So I am above the actual house, and I'm pretty irritated. This isn't my fire. It's been dry for about the last 6 days. If anybody knows about the California wildfires at the end of October, we're about 5 hours north of those fires. So I'll be spending a little time cleaning this up and finding a way to put this out without any shovel or anything like that. 2 years ago in the Columbia River Gorge, a kid took fireworks in the middle of summer. I think it was around August, and threw a bottle rocket or some crazy illegal firework, I'm sure, at least in Oregon, and threw it over the Columbia River Gorge in the National Forest out there, and almost half of Skamania County caught on fire. Luckily, it didn't jump over to Skamania County, but it certainly went right above Hood River, National Treasures, up in smoke. Yeah. Pretty disgusting. Let's see what else we can find these pigs did. And I know what types did these. These are, I'm sorry, but these are all local assholes. Well, that's been there for a while. Now, what's strange about this is that this was one of the first trails here where witness Daryl from the Owl Moon property himself noticed the first thing that was laid out on, I believe, this trail here. The reason I came up here was to leave a recorder overnight, pick it up tomorrow, and tell this story. Not tell this story. He walked up this trail with his little dog Izzy to go rock hounding, which I was going to show you as well. And as he walked up this single trail, he called me on the phone, or texted me, and told me where he was and what he was doing. He said he thinks he's going to have to turn around to walk back because his dog was thirsty and he didn't have enough water. And as he turned down this single trail that he just walked in on, see how thin it is? See how open it is? Sitting upright in the middle of the trail, somewhere, probably right in here, was a bright red thermos standing straight up. Now that'd be pretty hard to miss. It was really the first time that we think something acknowledged the fact that it was listening to us. If it wasn't for the series of other things that had happened, then we wouldn't really think much of it. But that was the first wink and nod that something was paying attention. A thirsty dog, something that you can house water in, no matter how old and disheveled and used. I mean, it's covered in moss. It still was a wink and a nod. Now, before that, if you've read Tom Powell's book, then you would know. I gotta lock the car up here before we go on. If you read Tom's book, Edges of Science, which I strongly suggest you get, not only because of what I'm about to tell you, this story, but all the other stories that he collected from other people's activity. But in that story, and this is really the first time that it was acknowledged with me present as it happened, was the story of a young child. Actually, he was about 13. Close these doors here. I'm going to set this here. I'm going to try to keep the camera rolling here, but we got to put that fire out too. That's the best I could do for now. We'll walk the trail and see what happens. Maybe these jackhounds will come back and we can get these assholes on film. Alright, where was I? Oh, okay. So in Tom Powell's book, Edges of Science, you can read a section in there, a chapter, or maybe two, regarding the activity that happened up the Mackenzie more than 6 or 7 years ago for sure. And it involved me, a local from Cottage Grove, and his son. It's about an hour and a half from where we are right now in the Cascade Mountains. And the son and the dad were directed to a spot due to a suggestion by James Bobo Fay. And the reason James was in Oregon squatching alone with a guy named Tyler Bounds, who was the location scout at the time for finding Bigfoot, was they were shooting an episode in Oregon regarding the London tracks. So they had some time on their hands. They found a place to go put their tents up the Mackenzie, a place that they probably knew where there was action by one of the BFRO flat sites, I'm guessing, which is a private section for investigators or people that are involved with the BFRO to look at reports privately without the public looking. And I imagine that's probably where they found out where to go. And when they got in there, they stayed the night, and James Bobo Fay, can we just call him Bobo, brought his dog Monkey. And Monkey is a little scrapper. And Monkey clues in on Bigfoot action. And I guess maybe as the sun went down, if I remember the story correctly, Monkey started to clue in. Well, they had their tents laid out, so they said this is the spot. They stayed there. Now, as some kind of ritual, if I remember the story correctly, Bobo put his little abalone Sasquatch necklace out on one of his boots as a gift to the Bigfoot people. I'm calling them Bigfoot people. I don't know what he thinks. Oh, there's a big gunshot or rifle shot. Deer season was over yesterday, actually, I believe, on the 1st or 2nd of September, or November. Anyway, he leaves this Sasquatch abalone necklace on his boot. And I believe in the tent next to Bobo is the location scout Tyler Bounds. And on Tyler Bounds' boot when he woke up the next day was a necklace. Now, Bobo's necklace never got removed from what I remember of the story. There was, however, a necklace found atop a boot. Oh, here's some rock cairns. See those? Go take a look. I'm trying to hold the cameras still as I can without a gimbal. That's cool. There's a lot of interesting rocks down in here. A lot of carnelian and agates and quartz and fires. Yet again, evidence of forest fires that have come up here. And here's water if we needed it, right? Don't really have a way of collecting it. But if we had to, here it is. Anyway, so they wake up, not quite sure if they heard anything or saw anything previous to finding this new necklace on Tyler's boot. Anyway, I find out about this story, and I see the necklace, actually get the necklace in the mail from Tyler, and anyway, my buddy from Cottage Grove and his kid had some time off and decided to stay the night up there. I believe they stayed the night in a different spot at first, and then said, well, let's just go to the main spot. Really cool spot too. It's like a big open clearing, giant cedars with lightning strikes that have opened up these hobbit homes in them. Just a really cool spot, and a giant forest or a fire pit dug out. Lots different than left like we just found. Anyway, the father and son decide to stay a couple of nights, and the father in particular had already had a classic Sasquatch sighting up here in Bohemia Valley, which is an old gold mining district. And speaking, oh, I thought that was a gold pan. That would be a speaker. And this is, again, refrigerator parts, car parts. Really hard for me. These are straws from a coffee company called Dutch Bros. Another reason you can't get a hold of straws, you gotta have a paper straw now because people like this. And so they stay the night in this spot. The son hadn't been a witness to anything Sasquatch related. And as they're sitting around the campfire, there were small objects started to break around the campfire behind giant old growth Doug firs that have fallen naturally around the place. And the sun's going down. They decide to go for a night walk because they feel as though something's starting to happen. So they're going to meet them on their terms. There's an old trail near an old skid road that you can walk in this area. And one of the main creeks, which is a pretty large creek, was off to their left and an old logging road up an embankment off to their right. And as they were walking this road, they come to a large, rocky, empty creek bed. Kind of like this, but just imagine rocks everywhere instead of dirt. And they're standing there in the dark, and as they are standing there, they hear and feel this giant rock come whizzing towards them and explode in the embankment right in front of them. I think he said it sounded like a cannon going off. And of course it echoed tremendously all around them. And then if I remember correctly, more rocks course, that scared the hell out of the kid, as it would anyone. Probably scared the hell out of the father as well. And they immediately walked back up an embankment like this to get to the main road. And that's probably a good 150 yards to get to that point in the dark. So that probably took quite a while. And as they started walking up that road and getting to this old gravel skid road in the pitch black, they hear something trail them. And it is walking as they walk in the woods. They walk faster, it walks faster. They walk slower, it walks slower, but always in pace with them. So they're trying to get to the fire. And as they get to the fire, they grab a seat and wait. Fire's still going. And as they're waiting for God knows what, the son sees a little pine cone come rolling underneath his lawn chair, underneath the glow of the fire. And you can hear these things too, of course. Even a small little pine cone like this, in the dead quiet, even with the sound of crackling fire, will make a distinct sound. So they notice that. And bigger objects started to come in towards them, closer, and maybe even more aggressively. And then they started to see shadows in the firelight race back and forth from tree trunk to tree trunk. And Todd's advice was to, well, now you know his first name. That's all right. His father's name was Todd. Todd's advice was to stay put, stand your ground, see what happens. So he said, let's just think about something different. Let's talk about anything other than what's happening right now and see if we can hold our ground. The son agreed with his father. And this was not a typical father and son relationship. It was more like brothers, you know. Even though the kid was probably 12 years old or 13 at the most when this happened, with a 40-some-year-old father, it was more like brothers. And as they're holding their ground, Todd says, well, basketball season's about to start. You know, school's just around the corner. Tell me what we need as far as sports are concerned. And the son said, well, I need some shoes. I know you're in between jobs, or we're hurting right now financially, but it would be nice to have some basketball shoes, and I'd like to try out. And he agreed. That's a good idea. Let's focus in on making sure that's a priority, blah, blah, blah. Again, this is all in Tom Powell's book, Edges of Science, to get the exact version that was vetted by Todd before the book was released. Anyway, objects started to come in closer, even after they tried to get distracted, and the son began to get irritated and threw an object back towards the woods, towards these shadows racing back and forth, towards whatever was throwing them. Now, mind you, they didn't see Bigfoot, not according to the way I remember the story, but something was throwing rocks and pine cones and debris, probably sticks like this, and I don't think anything actually hit them, but, you know, even a move like that in the night is enough to make you wonder. Send a little tinkle down your leg, perhaps. And so when he threw that rock, things got worse. I think things got more aggressive, and at that point they were wondering, what do we do here? We have all our camping equipment, you know, our fishing equipment, everything's ready to stay here for a while. It's not more than a few minutes after a comment like that they left everything behind. Now, I get a phone call sometime after 1 in the morning, and all I remember is hearing the father scream the exact story I told you into the speakerphone, and a Dodge Durango, racing down Highway 126 back to Cottage Grove, and the voice of the son in the background. And the son, by the way, was smoking a cigarillo at age 12. And the reason I know that the son was having a cigar break as they're racing out of this area was he said, "Why do I taste tomatoes in my mouth?" Well, that's interesting part of the story, because before they had walked that creek bed and had rocks thrown at them, before the sun went down, they had left a Walmart bag full of cherry tomatoes hanging in a tree off one of the maple trees behind the campground near the creek, over right before a log like this, just maybe from about 5 feet high. Now, I heard that comment, and I was like, well, what does he mean he tastes cherry tomatoes in his mouth? You said he's smoking a cigar, or he said he is smoking a cigar. Why does he taste cherries or cherry tomatoes in his mouth? Well, I think that's kind of an important detail. It may point to something stranger happening, because they didn't have any cherry tomatoes with them. They weren't snacking on cherry tomatoes in the car. They didn't have any cherry tomatoes around them. They had just left them as a sample. And the taste of cherry tomatoes squirting in this kid's mouth over the top of, the fragrance of a cigar is pretty interesting. And those were his comments. And it points to some other examples along the way here with Sasquatch behavior. However extraordinary this sounds, perhaps they're able to share experiences with you as they have them from a distance. I have my reasons for thinking that. And perhaps that kid didn't taste cherry tomatoes as much as he thought, and the whole moment is overblown. But I'm listening to that entire story unfold from living in a trailer home, like an 18-foot golden falcon, circa early 80s decor inside, and not an important detail, but kind of gives you my perspective. And so I'm listening to this whole story, and they said, we got to go back for all our stuff in the morning. Do you want to go back and help us retrieve it and look for tracks maybe? Well, pouring out of the side of the mountain there is a natural spring that comes into this campground. It's an embankment kind of like this, and just imagine water pouring out of the side of the hill and a creek bed starting. Anyway, as we pull into the camp the next day around 10 o'clock in the morning, the boy and I are on foot while Todd's driving, and we're walking up ahead to look for tracks. And coming away from the spring and the slurry mud off the side of the gravel road in the mud were at least 2 tracks, and they were small. They were probably, smaller than my size 12. I think they were like a 10 and a half or 11 and a half. And they were 5-toed tracks with a heel and a ball and a foot and, an arch, not much of one. But you could definitely see that they were 5-toed, bare-footed tracks. And we got out and looked at that. And as we did, we started to measure it off and do all the stuff that you do before you cast a track, because we'd brought material to cast it with, some fix-it-all patching compound to be exact. And as we noticed these tracks, we decided to go check out the area, especially these cherry tomatoes, to see if they were taken. So we get into this area, and that's definitely done most likely by hands, huh? Root ball. Yeah, just one of those things. Let me turn up the brightness here a little bit. Going on 30 minutes. Better wind the story up. As we go check on the cherry tomatoes, we notice that the cherry tomatoes are out of the bag. There are pinch marks on the bottom of the bag, and just the cherry tomato casing has been set down on something that was sitting in front of the bag, right on one of the ferns. And there were like, I don't know, 12 or 14 cherry tomato casings with no juice in them. Something just sucked out the juice and set the casings there. And there are these human-looking type fingerprints on the bag. So we take note of that. We do all the typical stuff and collect the bag and take photographs, and I'm way more into it than those two. As far as documenting, this looks like something was after a shroom. That might be, I thought that would be a chanterelle. Nope, something's after mushrooms. By the way, it's chanterelle season, so yeah, I'm looking for those. It's kind of the wrong side of the mountain. Anyway, set the camera down here. As they're looking over this cherry tomato stuff with me, and we're talking about that whole cigar moment and yada yada yada, I noticed that we needed to cast those tracks soon because the time wasn't on our side. We had a whole lot of camping equipment we had to collect, so we all three go over there and cast these 2 or 3 tracks. And as we're casting them and letting them dry, we're kind of looking through the area and walking down to the creek bed where the big cannonball-sized rock explosion happened. And when we get back to camp, Todd tells his son, hey, why don't you give this bag of dog food as a present over to where we had those cherry tomatoes hanging, and just so we can get on, no pun intended, the good foot. And the son apprehensively agreed, but he didn't want to seem like a wuss wandering off in the woods in front of his dad, because there's kind of code of machismo going on here, no matter what age. Grabbed the little plastic bag of dog food, I think it was hard dog food, and headed back over to the spot that we were just at, really. And as Todd and I are looking at the plaster dry on the prints, all right, we ran out of memory on this 4K iPhone 6s Plus, but we're back. Anyway, I left off at the moment the pale-faced, gobsmacked boy walks back to camp. And as he's walking back, in his hands is something. So we ask what exactly he's got. And before we could really get the sentence out, he said, where did these shoes come from? And according to him, the same area where the cherry tomatoes were just found, he found, sitting right there atop the fern where we just were, a right and a left Converse All-Star suede pale blue size 10.5 shoe with a moss patina. And they even smelled like a cave. They were roughly his size, interesting enough. The one thing we're sure of, the only thing I'm sure of, is that those shoes were absolutely not where that boy said he found them. Now, we weren't with him when he found them, but where would he get a size 10.5 pale suede moss patina Converse All-Star? Would he have the story all preloaded? for for us. Um, Something that I could maybe possibly look into on my own with the whole red thermos incident? I don't think so. And the kid wouldn't wear the shoes, even though I think they were probably a gift. Waiting maybe for a move like that dog food, I don't know. Was it just some homeless guy dressed up, throwing rocks at people with guns? I don't think so. But it shows you a possibility here of behavior, and only a few will actually listen to this story and use it. Anybody that listens to this generally will just say, yeah, right. Well, the days of yeah, right are kind of over. If you guys haven't paid attention to what's going on with disclosure as far as the Navy and UFOs, your days of denial and yeah, righting your way through this life are sad, childlike days. Good luck with it. Anyway, it's been an interesting week overall in my life, so this is cathartic. If you want to check out the podcast, again, you can do that at strangebrowradio@gmail.com. Shoot me an email if you'd like to be guest. Or go to iTunes or YouTube or I think Stitcher or iHeartRadio, or you can find us on a number of social networks. And listen to our podcast. We talk about a great many things, because this is not just one issue you can put neatly in a box as explainable or blamed by Harry and the Hendersons. Something else is going on here. So, hope you enjoyed the story. Maybe I'll do more of these along the way. Over and out.